Gold, mega hats, and tough talk on immigration.
Time we got these freeloading immigrants off our backs and built that wall.
No, this isn't a Donald Trump wet dream, it's Spike Lee's scathing portrayal of war, race, and injustice. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into Da 5 Bloods to examine how this film isn't really about a quest for gold, but about something far greater. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe with that bell on, because here we go. It's no coincidence that Da 5 Bloods starts and ends with archival footage of two of the most important figures in African American history, Muhammad Ali on the left and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the right. Notice the juxtaposition of having a literal fighter on the left and a peacemaker on the right. This duality is seen through the characters in the film, most notably Paul, the fighter, and Norman, the peacemaker.
God is love. Love is God.
Muhammad Ali questions why his fellow brothers are being sent to the slaughter to fight an enemy that has never harmed them, to fight for a country that lynches and shoots at his people.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor hungry people in the mud for big powerful America and shoot them for what?
This is echoed by Hanoi Hannah, a real-life radio personality and propagandist during the Vietnam War who gave speeches in English directed towards the American military. She talks about how African Americans at the time made up 11% of the population, yet were 32% of the troops. While Muhammad Ali shared this bleak outlook, he's juxtaposed with Martin Luther King, who has a message of hope.
America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be.
This is a quote from African-American poet Langston Hughes' poem, Let America Be America Again, which sounds a lot like Make America Great Again, which I'll get to in a bit. However, in Hughes' poem, the title is used mockingly. For African-Americans, the history of America has been one of slavery and oppression. Why would anyone want to revert back to that? The end of this poem, however, is one of hope, that America will one day be that idealized vision of freedom, equality, and opportunity. We're not there yet, but we can dream that we one day will. The introduction is laden with examples of both military and police oppression. The history of America through the lens of Spike Lee is one of subjugation, violence, and injustice, both internally and abroad. Seeing these images, do we want to make America great again? And for whom are we making America great for? It's easy to be pessimistic about the world given this introduction, but as we'll find out as the film unfolds, Lee leans into hope, just like Dr. King. The film may begin with pessimism, but ends with hope. In modern-day Vietnam, we meet our four protagonists, Paul, Otis, Eddie, and Melvin. They've teamed up to search for a stash of gold they buried almost 50 years ago. This gold was originally meant for the Lahu people, a gift from the Americans for siding with them during the war, but the Bloods buried it, hoping one day to come back and use the money to help their own.
We repossess this gold for every single black boot never made it home. Every brother and sister stolen from Mother Africa to Jamestown, Virginia, way back in 1619. We give this gold to our people.
This speech is given by Norman, the fifth member of the 5 Bloods, and their leader. The Bloods aren't just looking for the gold, but also Norman's body, so that he may be brought home and given a proper burial. Of all the men, Paul had the closest connection to Norman, which is odd since Paul goes against almost everything Norman stands for. When the Bloods hear that Dr. King has been assassinated, Paul calls for blood. Norman, however, invokes King, saying that they need to control their rage and be peaceful. When Norman says the gold should be used for the betterment of their people, Paul later says the money will be spent on himself.
That gold should go towards black liberation.
Yeah. Our black liberation. You do for self.
Norman is seen as this saint-like figure, in one scene even sitting on a makeshift throne made out of palm branches. In Christian theology, palm branches symbolize victory, triumph, and peace, all things Norman represents. This is juxtaposed with Paul, who symbolizes greed, violence, and rage. Paul's story is one of tragedy. He served 3 tours in Vietnam, killed his best friend by friendly fire, a secret he keeps hidden that festers inside of him. He also watched as his wife died giving birth to his son David and has a complicated and dysfunctional relationship with him. David is also a foil to his father. Whereas Paul is uneducated, David went to college to become a teacher. David wanted to become the opposite of what his father was in a subconscious effort to lash out at his father who never loved him. Paul even chooses abandoning his son who is just shot in order to leave in the jungle on his own with his share of the gold. Paul also wears a Make America Great Again hat, completely oblivious to the effect it would have on the people there, a country which lost millions of lives due to American military intervention during the war. But this hat becomes a metaphor for greed throughout the film. In fact, the only characters who ever wear the hat are all deeply flawed, greedy, and violent individuals. We have Paul and the European gold smuggler Desroches. Fun fact, the French translation of Desroches is rocks, the same thing that comes out of Otis's backpack when they trick him at the end of the film. It's no coincidence this hat is symbolic of greed, considering Spike Lee's vocal criticism of US President Donald Trump, who adopted the slogan "Make America Great Again" for his 2016 presidential campaign. It's pretty clear in the film what Spike thinks of the current US president.
I guess you're too busy watching reality TV. Or electing a reality TV clown for a president.
We plead innocent to all charges, claims, accusations, allegations, and associations connected to the Klansmen in the Oval Office.
For Lee, MAGA, greed, and Trump go hand in hand, and Trump himself has been very vocal about how greed has been one of the driving forces of his life.
Because my whole life I've been greedy. I've grabbed all the money I could get. I'm so greedy. But now I want to be greedy for the United States. I want to grab all that money.
Paul's arc, however, isn't without some form of redemption. After bitten by a snake, Paul confronts the ghost of Norman, a ghost he doesn't want to see.
Go away, man. Please?
He doesn't want to confront the thing that has caused him so much pain all these years, the thing that's given him nightmares every night. By keeping the secret that he killed Norman buried inside him, he's let it fester, making the pain inside him lash out to those he loves, including his son. It's here that Norman tells Paul what he's needed to learn all these years, that it wasn't his fault and that Norman forgives him. Norman's forgiveness is in line with his almost Christ-like character. He even says that he died for Paul, just like Christ died for our sins.
I know you, blood. I died for you, blood.
While Paul and Norman are philosophically at two ends of the spectrum, Otis is caught in the middle, swaying back and forth between these two men as if caught in a tide. Near the end of the film, Otis is shot by Desroches, who throws the Make America Great Again hat onto his body. And when Desroches is shot, we get this.
Madness. Madness.
Laughter and madness. This whole situation is so out of hand, Otis can't help but laugh, and I can't help but think this is Spike Lee commentating on the state of America today. The MAGA hat on full display over the body of a dying black man. Well, in Vietnam, Otis fell in love with a prostitute named Tien, and unbeknownst to him, fathered a daughter. These children of American soldiers became known as Bui Doi, or Children of the Dust. They were mocked and looked down in Vietnamese society for being the sons and daughters of sex workers and looking like the enemy. No one knows the exact number of half-American, half-Asian children were born during the war, but the estimates are in the tens of thousands. Part of Otis's journey is cultivating the relationship with his daughter, who at the end of the film he embraces, finally happy. And the film ends largely on a positive note as the Bloods are able to get the money for their gold and put it to good use. We see here Melvin's wife Sissy and their son. She's received a check for $2 million. At the beginning of the film, Melvin tells the Bloods that she wants to move out of the neighborhood ever since a group of thugs moved in, so this money will absolutely help for that. We also see her holding a Purple Heart, but we aren't sure if that was previously earned or somehow posthumously awarded for his valiant show of bravery, taking a grenade for his fellow men. At a Black Lives Matter headquarters, one of the organizers says they just received a check for $2 million. This check is from Eddie, one of the few voices who said the money should go back to the people. In a similar vein, Hedy, Simon, and Seppo's share has gone towards the fight against landmines. Hedy's life has been devoted to helping those affected by war. She feels somewhat responsible for what has happened in countries like Vietnam because her ancestors were complicit in the exploitation of the Vietnamese people. The French had colonized Vietnam, and her family made a fortune off the various rubber plantations and rice farms which utilized Vietnamese labor. This is her way of paying back. Vin even gets his share, which, judging by the posters in the back of his agency, looks to have gone towards his business. We also get a short epilogue featuring Norman's two sisters as his body is brought back to US soil. This is followed by David at his school where he teaches African American history. The board behind him is filled with various black historical figures. But this whole epilogue is narrated by Paul in his final redemptive moment. This is him reciting his letter to David, a letter he wrote before the main events of the film and only to be read upon his death. In it, he details how the demons of his past haunted him and how that pain was taken out on his son. He acknowledges how he made David feel like he wasn't loved, how he failed him as a father, and to let him know it wasn't his son's fault. There are small interesting details here, like the empty bottle of Johnny Walker and the pictures of his family in the background. This was a deeply troubled man, but one who deep down loved his family, even if he rarely showed it.
You best believe I will love you always, son.
The film ends with the words of Langston Hughes recited by Dr. King, with that hope of a better America. But as the final text crawl indicates, we are reminded we are still far from it. Dr. King, a man of peace, was shot for standing up for what he believed in. And if there's anything recent events surrounding George Floyd and the BLM protests have shown us, is that things are still far from that idealized American dream of freedom and equality. The real treasure of Da 5 Bloods ultimately had nothing to do with gold. It's forming these new relationships, love, and forgiveness. Until we as a society learn this too, we still have a long way to go. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm always coming out with new videos. You can also follow me on Twitter at ThinkStoryYT.